Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about 2022 at the Better Works conference today. And there is a lot going on. So let me spend the next 30 minutes trying to give you a sense of what's happening and what we've learned for the last couple of years. The first thing I need to sort of reflect on is where we are in the economy. You know, every day I feel like there's a new economic time bomb that's launched on us, but it all makes sense. Basically, what's been going on for the last 14 years, going back to the 2008 financial crisis, is a steady, accelerating digitization of everything. Our companies, our jobs, our business models, our products, our services, our roles, our employee experiences, our lives. And of course, in the middle of that, that created a new career model, a new way of developing and sharing content, the whole social media craze and the disruption caused in our political system. And then we add the pandemic and we essentially accelerated the process to the point that we are now in a world where this year, as I'll show you, hiring is the #1 challenge you're going to have. And next year, it's going to get worse. It's going to be really hard to hire. And as you all know quite well, one of the things we learned, perhaps the #1 thing we learned, is that people are incredibly adaptable. We have had almost 2 years of this pandemic. And during these 2 years, we've had a significant amount of the workforce work from home, work remotely, work in gig work and contract work. People went on furloughs and then came back to work. Companies downsized and then upsized, and now they can't get enough of their products and services to go to market because of the supply chain issues. And human beings adapted, not without a lot of stress, and certainly led to a need to really take better care of our well-being and our health. But we in HR became essentially the heroic function in companies to adapt to these changes. And in many ways, a lot of these things were coming. They were, if I think back about all the things that we've been dealing with during the pandemic, they're not new topics. Most of them were already on our agenda somewhere, but they got heightened and accelerated. And we did a lot of them a lot faster than we thought. Now, as you go into 2022, it's going to be a little bit different. We're now in a situation where prices are going up. There probably will be an interest rate rise, but in the middle of all this, the automation of work has created a new breed of jobs, and we don't have enough workers. In the US, there are almost 14 million jobs open. In fact, there's more than 14 million as of this week. Out of 155 million workers, that's almost 1 in 10. It's almost as if you walked around the office, if you had an office, 1 out of 10 seats would be empty, waiting for somebody to fill it. Next year, and you can see from this list, a lot of these are essential, what we call deskless workers, many of whom, by the way, need products like BetterWorks to manage their projects in their time. But next year, based on a lot of research coming out of Citibank and some other economists, this is going to get much worse. In fact, there's an expectation in some of the studies that we could create 5 to 6 to 7 million new jobs in 2022, which would make this almost 1 in 9 jobs unfilled, which means you're going to have a really hard time hiring. And in the middle of that, of course, we have this compounding problem that employees or workers feel extremely highly empowered. In August, 4.1 million people quit voluntarily in the US. In October, it was 4.3 million. If you think about that, that's in 1 month. Multiply that by 12. That's almost 50 million people per year leaving their jobs voluntarily out of a workforce of 155 to 160 million. That's almost 1 out of 3 workers are voluntarily leaving their positions. I don't think we've ever lived through a job situation that's this urgent for employers. Now, for employees, it's a great thing in a sense that there's lots of new opportunities and jobs and bonuses and pay is going up. But for you as a HR person or a recruiting person or a OD person, It means you need to take care of the people you have better than ever. Because the issue of hiring and retaining people is really no longer a nice to have problem for HR. It is a business imperative. Companies simply will not be able to grow. They will not be able to meet their business plans, and they will ratchet them down based on the need to hire. And many things are changing inside of HR as a result of this. Perhaps the most interesting to me is over the last 2 years, there's been a massive increase in the sophistication of internal mobility and internal recruiting. This is data from the 7 largest companies in these industries. And you can see that during this year, more than 50 to 60% of their hiring was either internal recruits, which means we need to know who's available inside the company and what their skills are, which, by the way, is another big initiative going on within HR. And we need to, and the second group is what are called silver medal candidates, people who worked at the company or applied for jobs in the past and came back. So one of the big initiatives for the next couple of years is getting your hands and heads wrapped around the skills and capabilities inside the company and building a talent marketplace or whatever kind of internal mobility system you have to facilitate that transformation, because this internal transformation is now going on in real time. We used to talk about transformation as a once a decade or once every 5-year project, and we'd hire a consulting firm to help us. Now it's going on constantly. I mean, during the last 2 years, 25 to 30% of workers have changed jobs, have changed careers, have changed professions. Women have been forced out of the workforce in an unprecedented rate. And we survived just fine. Most companies are doing quite well. Profitability is up. The economy is doing well. The stock market's doing well. It's just proof that we're going to be living in a continuous disruption experience. Now, on the opposite side of this, if you think about what's going on in the workforce, their dynamics have changed too. One of the most interesting things to me that's changing the nature of HR is longevity. There was an interesting article in the New York Times about this, but this has been published in the past. Most of our children or people in their 20s and 30s are going to live well into their hundreds, which means they will have a career span that could be 70 to 80 years in length. That means during their career, companies, industries, technologies will completely change. And what that's done is it's moved us very far away from the 20 or 25-year-old model of your career being tied to one company, to your career being tied to many companies, to your career being tied to the projects that you completed and the achievements that you can talk about, to your career being tied to your skills. And this means that recruiting organizations and talent management organizations are beginning to become very, very smart about identifying the skills that we need in a role or in the company or in a function, and then matching those skills to the people inside the company. And BetterWorks, plays a big role in that, because the OKR and the ongoing performance management process is part of understanding and developing and categorizing those skills. Inside of HR, of course, we've been doing virtually everything. All 8 of these things have been going on in real time. And I drew this chart a year or so ago to try to show people how all these things are related. But in a sense, they're now all rubber banded together. You can't really move or push on one of them without all the other ones moving too. And that's really a big change. The old service delivery model of HR, where you had COEs kind of operating independently, kind of doing their transactional work, really doesn't work anymore. In order to retain and hire and improve the engagement of people, you have to improve internal mobility. In order to improve internal mobility, you have to know what skills and capabilities are needed in jobs and what skills and capabilities exist. In order to do that, you have to have a job architecture that supports that kind of work, and a leadership pipeline and a leadership development program that supports those new roles and responsibilities. So all of these things are connected together, making HR a much more cross-functional, what I call full stack career. In fact, our entire business now is focused on building full stack capabilities in the HR function. And all over the world, we're finding companies just doing amazing things to improve their HR skills, their capabilities, and their operating models. Now, the other thing, of course, that drives a lot of the solutions that BetterWorks addresses is the way we work. And let me just touch on this. I may have talked about this in a prior presentation, but of all the things that automation has done over the last 2 decades, and maybe it's most accelerated the last decade, it has not eliminated jobs. That was kind of a somewhat silly idea that came out of the Oxford Economics group. We all got all jazzed up about it, but it didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. We created jobs, but they're more human jobs. They're more important jobs. They're more sophisticated jobs. They're higher wage jobs. You know, truck drivers is a complicated job. A nurse is a complicated job. A salesperson is a complex job. A marketing manager is a complex job. All of those jobs have lots and lots of automation underneath them, but the routine work that people used to get paid by the hour, by the piece to do, it's just not there as the way it used to be before. So we've reached a stage now where your success as an organization is dependent upon the ability for each individual to add their God-given skills and capabilities and personal goals into the job. And if they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel healthy, if they don't feel psychologically safe, physically safe, and well supported, they won't do that. And so stress and burnout and well-being, emotional support are becoming CEO level issues. Now, I've done a lot of work. We just published a big research report on this called The Healthy Organization. And the well-being industry has been around a long time, but it is now becoming central to business success. This data is sort of striking of how much pessimism and mental and behavioral health people now bring to work. And we've talked to a lot of companies that teach their leaders about the basics of symptoms of stress and crisis among their employees so that they can better lead their teams understanding the issues of mental and behavioral health. Employee experience is not contributing to this. Even before the pandemic, we had lots of issues with this. I remember a very long article I wrote about this called The Overwhelmed Employee. Well, now people are even more overwhelmed. They're working from home. They have their kids and their dogs and people delivering packages to their houses. People are working more hours. Most people have not returned entirely to the workplace yet, and they probably won't for another couple of quarters. And we've had this huge flurry of technology. In fact, the tech industry, of which BetterWorks is a major part of it, has been extremely successful at building new systems, new cloud-based applications, to the degree now that the average large company has 70 employee-facing systems, 70. And so one of the big strategies for us as HR leaders and you as HR practitioners or business partners or designers is to simplify this, is to put more things into one place so people don't have to poke around and try to find everything. In addition to the technology issues, of course, the health and well-being issues are also a major part of business. In my original research on well-being years ago, when I first got involved in it, it was mostly a corporate benefit. And most of the well-being providers were offering, apps or education solutions or financial management solutions. They were offered as part of the benefit package. Well, that volume and that budget has radically increased. In fact, today, in 2021, going into 2022, it's almost 31% of all payroll in the United States. So it's billions and billions of dollars. And companies are not getting their return on this investment. As we found in our healthy organization research, most of this money is not providing the real benefit that people want, which is psychological safety, flexibility in their job, a sense of purpose, a sense of growth, a sense of mission, a sense of trust. Those are the things that really matter. And from your standpoint, dealing with things like performance management, productivity. Now, let me just take a minute on productivity. All the research that I've done and all the companies that I talk to have convinced me that it is not employee happiness that creates productivity. It is employee and productivity that creates happiness. In other words, if we make it easier and clearer for people to do their jobs effectively, we reward them psychologically as well as financially for doing those jobs, they will be happier, they will enjoy their work, they will enjoy their company, and they will stay at your company. So in many ways, one of the most important things we've learned about the pandemic is rather than getting too wrapped up in health and well-being, which is obviously important, how do we help people get their jobs done? And a lot of the work we've been doing in our academy has to do with organization design and performance and doing things to make work easier. Now, obviously, you can't talk about performance management and leadership without talking about the role of management. And leaders in management have changed a lot. During the pandemic, we really created an empathetic model of leadership, CEO as Chief Empathy Officer, but CEOs are still very concerned about the basics. Do we have enough people? Do we have the right skills? Are we competing fast enough? Are we getting work done executing at the rate we need to keep up? And are we creative enough? And let me talk about the creativity one for a minute. Creativity doesn't just come because you tell people to be creative. Creativity comes from expertise. The most creative, the most inventive, the most innovative people in your company are many times the people that know the most about what you do and how you do it, because they know what could be done better. So in many ways, what we've learned about the pandemic is that by focusing on the people and the skills and capabilities and the alignment of people inside the company, we can clearly grow out of this current situation much more quickly. And so, I think as you go out and look for performance solutions or other talent management solutions, think about your leadership philosophy. In fact, in all the work we do with companies in performance management, and we've done lots and lots of projects with companies in this area, I always start with a discussion of what is your management philosophy? Are you a rank and yank kind of philosophy? Are you highly competitive? Are you highly collaborative? Do you want to reward people for overachievement and not reward people for underachievement? Or do you want to develop people? Do you want to move people around, or do you want them to stay in one place? Those philosophical management philosophies will drive your performance management strategy. And of course, BetterWorks is there to help you automate and integrate all this in a meaningful way. Now, one of the other things I want to touch on for the next year is learning. And I know you're not really in a learning group so much talking about it at BetterWorks, but it is affecting everything we do because the rate of change of business is accelerating rapidly. In the digital domain, of course, cyber, crypto, NFTs, metaverse, all these new words that are sort of bizarro ideas that don't make a lot of sense become entire domains of business. And that's not going to slow down. Microsoft believes that we're already as short 150 million digital experts. By the way, a lot of these digital jobs can be trained from people inside of your company now if you have a good system for doing that. But an even bigger problem is the need to build human skills. The workforce is elongating on both ends. People are working to later years, so there's an aging of the workforce, but there's also a younger growth in the workforce because the younger children of baby boomers are entering their 30s and 40s, and they are taking over the main senior roles in companies now. And when you talk to young people, they don't really want skills on tech stuff. They can learn that on their own. They want help with management and leadership and professional skills and industry skills. And CEOs are saying this too. So we have to find ways of implementing systems in performance management and others that facilitate and align people around these new skills. It's interesting in this research, which came from Australia, the younger people on the right are even more interested in behavioral skills than they are in digital skills. So this big, conversation we've been having about digital skills at work is kind of ending. That's a part of the workforce, but it is not the predominant part of the workforce. Most of us are consumers and users of digital technology, not developers of digital technology. And so this is a massive issue too. Now, one of the ways companies are now addressing this issue is through mobility. I mentioned mobility earlier, and let me just take a minute on this. Perhaps the largest trend that has come across HR in my world is this idea of a talent marketplace, allowing people to move around inside the company as they see fit, and allowing hiring managers to bring people into the company or to find people inside the company in a deterministic way. Almost all the large companies are now examining how to do this. And this is a big change because it kind of does away with the 9-box grid, the talent review process, the manager gateways to your career. The companies that do this well don't have managers standing in the middle between you and your career. You really kind of run your own career. Now, you might have a career advisor or a coach, but this is a way for an organization to thrive and to create a very dynamic workforce internally by matching people to opportunities using AI, using skills models, with development added. And I think this technology platform, which is now basically available from about 30 different vendors, is going to be sort of central to organization design in the future. And it tends to change the way the tech stack looks, because the talent marketplace sort of sits in the middle between the learning platforms and all the learning technology companies have, and the recruiting platforms and all of the external sourcing that companies have. So I think that thing in the middle is going to kind of branch its way out and start taking over the systems on either end. And of course, performance management is a big part of that too. We know, by the way, that people will reskill themselves in new roles. This research, which I just showed you, just skip by here, was a study we did in data science, which showed that when companies build their own data science curriculum, they find mathematics experts in marketing, in HR, in IT that are actually capable of becoming data scientists, and they can improve or develop skills in data science at 1/6 the cost of hiring data scientists on the outside. And that means that learning is really hot. I have never seen the learning industry as hot as it is right now. Most companies have learning experience platforms. Microsoft Viva has a learning module. LinkedIn has a learning module. In fact, most of the tech vendors now have advanced new AI-driven learning experience platforms that recommend learning. We can now create micro learning and macro learning and integrate it together. Learning in the flow of work, which started out as kind of an idea that I was promoting back about 5 years ago, has now gone mainstream. Most companies are finding ways to do this, and building what I call capability academies. A capability academy is a structure in the company to focus on the sales, the leadership, the tech, the supply chain, the safety, whatever the corporate capabilities are that are most important to you, and bringing people together to build that out. Now, you can't talk about 2022 without talking about employee experience. Employee experience has become a buzzword in HR. It is a driver of engagement and retention and productivity, and also a big driver of employment brand. We did a massive study of this during the last year. And what we basically learned is that employee experience is becoming a design discipline. It's a discipline for you to design experiences at work. It's not just running surveys. It's not just looking at data. It's getting to know what different work groups do in your company day by day, minute by minute, and then designing entire experiences, including self-service, including service centers, many of which are running HR services for those work groups for their success. Now, we did research on this, quite extensive research on this. You can download the research report on this, and we have a whole diagnostic if you'd like to evaluate your own EX strategy. And we looked at more than 80 different practices, and all of which are great things in these 6 areas: in job design, in management, in workplace experience, in health and well-being, in growth and development, and in leadership. And what we found was the things that mattered the most have to do with trust, inclusion, transparency, and a sense that leadership cares, followed very closely by development, growth, recognition, and the development of leaders. So even though you might think EX is a tech problem, that's really the lowest level of support. We really need to think about EX as a culture issue of creating a flexible, trusting, developmental, focused workplace. And in your performance management strategy, since a lot of you I know are working on that, that should be one of the things that you think about as you design the process for the future. We also know, by the way, that I'm going to skip through recruiting, that the tech market is adapting to support this. Better Works is obviously a part of this, gigantic industry of HR technology. The HR technology industry has evolved significantly in the last 2 or 3 years. It used to be these systems were systems for HR, mostly designed for HR data entry and HR process integration with user interfaces for employees. Now it's the opposite way around. These are systems for employees that help employees do their jobs, that make employees' lives better, simplified, and also provide tools to HR. And that's really where I think Better Works is going. It's essentially going from a world of what we used to call HR tech or tech for HR to work tech, tech for work, which is used and facilitated by HR. Now, as far as where the HR tech fits, it's interesting, as Better Works has grown and the company has established itself as a hub of technology for many, many of the interfaces that you do on a project or daily basis, so is everything else in HR. We used to look at tools like Workday or SuccessFactors or Oracle or ADP or whatever they may be as platforms for the HR department that had portals or interfaces for various working groups inside of the company. And, employees would log into those things periodically, not very often, but when they needed to, and they'd poke around, they'd find what they need, or they wouldn't find what they'd need. They'd call the business partner, get help, and then they go back to the regular jobs. Well, that's not really where HR works anymore. Now HR really is here to support the work of the employees and all those HR things too, but really working as integrated to the systems of productivity. So the entire HR technology industry, all of the vendors like Better Works and others have moved up this stack to build interfaces into Workplace or Microsoft Teams or Google Workspace or Slack or Salesforce or Zoom or whatever it may be. And I think this is one of the most exciting things that Better Works has done is the old performance management systems were basically, forms, and you'd fill out your forms with your goals and you'd go in there every now and then and you'd check on them and you'd kind of like get bored with it and probably not spend a lot of time there because they didn't really help you get your job done. Now we have systems like Better Works that have become productivity tools, team management tools, ways to integrate communications and conversations and recognition and rewards going on in the systems of productivity into Better Works, interfaces to Salesforce for salespeople, interfaces to call center or customer management systems for call center agents. So just like all the other HR tech vendors have moved up this stack, so have performance management tools. And it's a very, very interesting and significant change. The final thing I want to talk about, because I only had about a half an hour, is the role of HR. And it's very clear to me as an analyst and a consultant that HR has played a heroic role during the pandemic. All of the conversations about HR not having a seat at the table have disappeared, and you are now asked and expected to do some very important things. What's changed, though, is you can't copy them from other companies the way you could in the past. In my early days as an analyst, most of the time I would visit a company, they would ask me, what does GE do? We want to copy their model. We want to copy what PepsiCo did. We want to copy what Google did. We want to copy what Starbucks did. You name your favorite company. Let's just do what they do. Well, you can't do that anymore. Every company is different. Every company's culture is different. Even within the same industries, two companies will operate in very different ways. And that means that you and we are really designers. We're consultants. We are here to innovate, to create, to pioneer, to experiment, to iterate on the solutions that we build in a cross-functional way. Now, if I had given you this little speech 2.5, 3 years ago, you would have sort of ignored it. But now know, I think most of you, that this is what happened during the pandemic. This is what HR departments did. And I know this. I spent, hours and hours and hours on the phone with many, many of you talking about this. And so, my final challenge to you as an HR person or an HR team is to develop yourself. A lot has happened. A lot has changed over the last 2 years. And in 2022, we're going to be in one of the toughest talent markets you've ever experienced. So you're going to have to get really good at agile organization design, building a great employee experience, understanding and listening to what's on your employees' minds, designing integrated technology solutions that make work easier, and really working with leadership on culture, well-being, and making sure your organization is healthy. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak briefly to you today. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you again to BetterWorks for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.